We'll talk about some standout prospects in the AHL, including Joshua Roy, Daniil, Gushchin, Logan Stankoven, and a lot more coming up on today's show of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be breaking down some AHL standouts among prospects. We'll talk about some forwards first and foremost, guys like Joshua Roy, Daniil Gushchin, Logan Stankoven. There's a long list for us to talk about. We'll also discuss some productive defensemen. In our final segment, we'll talk about Brandt Clarke, Logan Mayu, Olen Zellweger, and Topi Niemela. All that's coming up on today's show. Make sure to stick it out around to the end. But before we get into any of that, today's show is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app and use code LOCKEDONNHL after creating an account and going to checkout for your first purchase. Again, $20 off that first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. All right, so let's get it started here with talk about Joshua Roy, because Joshua Roy is not showing any signs of slowing down. And as good as you get in the QMJHL, the step up to the AHL is absolutely massive. And there were specific things that Joshua Roy needed to work on, which he's greatly improved, which really helps with the whole process here. But yeah, Joshua Roy is well above a point per game. He's one of the most productive rookies in the AHL right now. And is doing really good overall with the time that he's getting in Laval. He's been paired with Sean Farrell, who's another prospect of the Montreal Canadiens in Laval, and both of them are complementing each other's skill sets so incredibly well. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about a combination of skills there that really works well. But what's really impressed in isolation with Joshua Roy is how he's improved his overall puck movement, his ability to hold on to pucks for just the right moments in order to kind of open up space and help his teammates kind of create offensively. But what's always been his bread and butter is mainly just delegating off transitions and moving into the offensive zone for a shot, right? But yeah, what have you liked about the progression in Roy's game so far?
I've been really impressed with how he's been able to adapt his style of play to the professional level. His pace, I think, has taken a significant jump in the last year, and
Yeah.
that was one thing I was, I think, going to look for this season in my viewings of Joshua Roy. But it was pretty apparent from training camp onwards that wasn't really going to be the issue that I was perhaps afraid it would be. And
Yeah.
I mean, look, Joshua Roy leads all AHL rookies in shots by 5 with 53 in 15 games. He is shooting often. He's getting into scoring positions. He's finding that soft ice. He's opening himself up for his line mates. I mean, we've seen Sean Farrell find Joshua Roy in the slot about like 8 times in the last 2 weeks. And you can see that chemistry blossoming, which has been really great to see. So I think with Joshua Roy, he's really been leaning into the skill side of his game, which I think a lot of us were still asking questions about. I know I myself was. I think I always had a little bit more skepticism about how he would translate as an offensive piece to the professional level. Whereas I think you were always a little bit more optimistic on that end, and so far you're looking pretty good on that take.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's just constantly been adapting his game to the right circumstances, and we saw it at the World Juniors when he was paired with the likes of Connor Bedard and Logan Stankoven. It's just the way that he complements the line is so adaptable. He can play that sharpshooter role. He can play that forechecker role, that defensive forward role. He molds his game to the circumstances extremely well, and that's one thing that's really underrated in prospects. And overall, I mean, if you're trying to make it in hockey and watching this podcast, I mean, first, I might be better off on the ice, but still, if you're watching this and want to kind of like work on your game and improve small things about your game that'll help you kind of reach the next level, try to adapt, try to understand what your teammates are doing and mold your game around that. I think Roy does that to perfection, and it's been clear every single step of the way. I mean, in his draft year, when he moved to Sherbrooke for the first time, he adapted to his role really well and found that kind of goal scoring role. But
Yeah.
then the next year, when he was kind of placed in a primary scoring role, he improved his playmaking because he was looking for his teammates more. And then now that he's in the AHL, he's working on the more professional habits of his game. For example, working on his ability to move off the puck in ways that don't just put him in a scoring position, but actually take an opponent out of the play as well. Using magnetism in order to draw players into him and open up space on the ice, or, especially working on holding on to pucks for a second longer than he used to. Was a player who used to, especially in the QMJHL, kind of accelerate passes through lanes every time he would get a puck. But now we're seeing a Joshua Roy who holds onto the puck, waits for an opponent to draw in, and then plays through them, which is exactly what he needs to be working on in Laval. And that's why I'm a big proponent of, with players like Joshua Roy, just let him play in the AHL, let him develop his game, work on these things, and then hit the next ground running. I see a lot of
Yeah.
Habs fans pushing really hard to get Roy in the NHL, and
And
I
there's
get
no
it.
rush.
I
Yeah.
get it. This Habs team sucks. They're last in the NHL for regulation wins. A lot of their wins have just been scrappy overtime or shootout wins.
Yeah.
It's I get the desire to see a winning and productive product in the NHL. It's just, if that's gonna harm Roy's development, it's not worth it. Especially if you can get a top 3
Yeah.
pick in this draft, right?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And I mean, speaking of bad teams and young players being called up, like Daniil Gushchin has been excellent in the AHL this season, and he's what, like a year and a half older than Joshua Roy. So I think
Yeah.
he's very much in that age bracket where the call up makes a lot more sense in terms of the development.
Yeah.
And he's been very good in my 2 NHL viewings of him this season. He's played 2 games so far. He's gotten 1 assist, but he's been trying a lot of things. There's been a couple highlights of skill plays where he's going between the legs and just experimenting with creativity and just trying stuff and seeing what works. And on
Yeah.
a San Jose Sharks team that has been rough, to say the least, I think having an infusion of skill and creativity is a really nice thing.
Yeah.
And he's shown enough at the AHL level in my mind to kind of graduate. I mean, he's over a point a game to start this season as well, and he's been dominating basically every non-NHL league he's been in since he's gotten drafted. So
Yeah.
Daniil Gushchin's one of my personal favorites and another AHL standout here.
Yeah, it's with him as well. It's also the progression in his game. He's gone from just a pure creative force with really high offensive skill to a more well-rounded, better defensively, better, more involved physically type of player.
Yeah.
He's involved in more facets of the game, which gets him more puck touches, and the more puck touches Daniil Gushchin gets, the better he is.
Oh
He's
yeah.
the type of player who exploits every puck touch. And yeah, that's been clear so far, especially with his call up. Catching a couple of his shifts in recent NHL games. I mean, you're looking at a player who has the potential to become a kind of top 6 force in the NHL, given the skill set and also the tools that he's added over the years. And is that still your projection for Gushchin as a top 6 forward who can kind of do a bit of everything, but mainly bring an infusion of skill to your line?
I think mainly in a second line role. Like a second line role is kind of always what I've envisioned as his upside, and that has only kind of increased in my confidence in that projection since his draft year.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that second line upside where he's able to bring a real element of skill from the wing while also supporting the defensive efforts and really being quite engaged off puck in the defensive zone. And he's definitely developed into a player that does not project as a liability defensively, whereas in his draft year, I think that was kind of a concern for some people.
Yeah.
But his development's been excellent, and he's one of the more electrifying young NHLers that we've seen so far this season, in my eyes.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll talk about Logan Stankoven, Brad Lambert, Isak Rosen, and a lot more in our second segment here regarding forwards that are standing out in the AHL. Before we get into any of that, though, we'll get a quick word from our sponsors over at GameTime. If you're looking for tickets for any event that requires last minute modifications, buying a ticket at the last second, game time is the best place to get that set up. I use game time a lot because my schedule is very volatile, so I can find myself with an afternoon free, out of nowhere where I'm supposed to be working. And they're really useful in terms of getting you cheap, effective tickets at the last minute within reasonable, delays. They've got a bunch of deals as well, which really facilitate the whole thing. They've got last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, especially I find really interesting, where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seat, and that gives you an average of about 18% of savings. They have the Game Time guarantee as well, which means that you always get the best price. So if you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what Game Time's offering you, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, it's really simple. You create an account, you redeem the code Locked On NHL for $20 off at checkout. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some more forwards here in the AHL that have been popping off, as they say. We'll start with Logan Stankoven, 18 points in 14 games so far with the Texas Stars in the AHL.
Not bad.
What's new there? I mean, I think we've we've been banging the drum for Logan Stankoven for the longest time, and he hasn't disappointed so far. Every level he's played at, he's been playing at the top level, outproducing his expectations, and especially playing bigger than his size on every
Oh
shift.
my god, yeah. He's the definition of playing bigger than his size.
It's just the intensity on him is absurd. I don't think I can name you a more intense prospect. Everything he does, he just puts his whole heart into every shift, and it's just he reminds me a bit of Brendan Gallagher, but the skill set is so much better. I mean, the shot's ridiculous, right? I mean, that alone is
Yeah.
just out of this world.
He has some really, really high-end tools to go with that mold of high-intensity winger or
Yeah.
center even, like, he can play both, and, I mean, I can't say I'm surprised that he has 10 goals and 18 points in 14 AHL games to start the season.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a player who's been basically going 2 points a game in the dub since he got drafted,
Mhm.
and, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely glad that I ranked him at, like, 13th overall in his draft year, and think that's aged decently well at this stage,
Yeah.
and he's one of my favorite players outside the NHL, and I think that he's going to be a really, really, really good, but more than that, extremely likable NHL player for the next decade and a half.
Yeah.
This is a player that every team is going to hate to play against, but Dallas Stars fans are going to love him to bits. He's going to be a cult hero, and if in my prediction, I think like he
Yeah.
plays that style that whether he caps out off as a second liner or a first liner doesn't really matter,
Mhm.
because the style that he plays with and the skill that he has is going to be so impactful at the NHL level. He plays such an NHL style of play already, and he did when he was 17 years old as well. And he's only added tools to that toolkit since then, and yeah, he's awesome. He's been great for a while, and yeah, he's lighting up the AHL, which puts a really big smile on my face.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a very easy player to root for. I feel like there's just
So
that
easy.
style of play is just it just makes you want to root for him. But speaking of Texas Stars that are working really well in terms
Oh
of
yeah.
prospects right now in the AHL, we've got Mavrik Bourque, who's at the same point per game range as Logan Stankoven. He's also got 18 points in 14 games, but heavier on the assist side. He's got 7 goals and 11 assists. Bork has had an interesting kind of progression throughout his post draft progression there. I think that when you look at Maverick Bork, you immediately think, okay, we've got a playmaking forward who can play a bit of every role, but you can't rely on him too much defensively. I feel like that's changed a tiny bit. He's gotten better at getting involved defensively. He's gotten more engaged in his own zone. He's back checking harder. But he's still trying. I mean, he's still figuring out what the line is between going back hard defensively and still staying in an offensive position. But so far in terms of production, a lot of it is going to come on the power play. He's going to be kind of threading those needles on the power play. He's mainly going to be the type of guy who's connecting with teammates cross ice and finding them across the offensive zone and just overall kind of quarterbacking the play, but from the half wall. And I think that if he's kept in that position as he climbs the ranks, No, even if it's on the second power play for Dallas, you're still looking at a player who's in the right. I mean, he's in his comfort zone.
Oh yeah,
That's where he's comfortable there. The
for sure.
5-on-5 play has been decent, but mainly it's just moving laterally, switching lanes, finding those soft areas in transition. He's gotten, he's improved his skating as well, which is decent. But yeah, what's your read on Bourque so far? And do you see him as the type of player who can make a top six? And do you think he will?
I've been a really big fan of Bork going back to his draft year. Both
Yeah,
him and Stankoven are players that I would have been banging the table for 15th overall,
yeah,
and they fell to 47th and 30th respectively, which
hmm
is just gross and excellent drafting value. And hey, here they are, right towards the top of AHL scoring already.
yeah,
So Mavrik Bourque is a player like in his draft year. I was a really, really big fan of his combination of high end playmaking and goal scoring ability, and overall the processing speed of the game was just second to none in the queue.
yeah,
And overall in the CHL was definitely one of the better ones in that draft class. And uh, while his D+1 progression wasn't quite the level that I was hoping for,
hmm
he's really stepped up since then at the professional level. And I still see a player that projects as a top six center. I think that there's an outside chance that he can be a complementary top line winger.
yeah,
Probably less of a chance than with Stankoven, but likely a second line center is probably my most comfortable projection at this stage. And as you said, adding in the defensive effort, and really what I've valued on that front has been consistent attempts to make a difference defensively at the professional level going back
yeah,
to last season. And while yes, as you mentioned, there's definitely still some speed bumps in there of him kind of overcommitting defensively and then not being there to support the counterattack, but it's been a really, really solid integration of defensive habits that I've seen in Mavrik Bourque that really was not there at the
hmm
at the Q level. So yeah, I'm still a really big fan of Bourque. I think that high IQ and toolsy centers are right up my alley, and
yeah.
Bourque definitely fits that mold.
100%. But yeah, that brings us to Isak Rosen, a prospect of the Buffalo Sabres, who kind of flies under the radar given how good their pool is. I mean, when you've got, Matt Savoy and Zach Benson and
Oh,
Yuri
so many.
Kulik and, JJ Paterka, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, he kind of gets lost in that mix, but he's got 17 points in 14 games in the AHL right now with Rochester, and he's playing really well. I think the main thing with Rosen is he really needed to kind of get involved in physical battles, not only more, but in ways that don't, end up with him on his butt. I mean, he's pretty
Yeah,
frail. And I think he's definitely worked on that, and that's helped him kind of improve his production. But overall, I mean, in Rosen, you're getting a player who does the brunt of his work in transition. He's a really kind of elusive and evasive skater. The way that he accesses the middle, you kind of think the whole time that he's going to drive down the boards as a defenseman, and then before you know it, he's across your body and trying to make a play through the middle of the ice. Um, that's one thing that really kind of solidifies the type of player that he is. But overall, I mean, the defensive improvements have been really, really solid. He's been one of the better defensive forwards on a pretty good Rochester team. And yeah, I mean, there's so many different areas of progression in this game, and so many different areas that are worth exploring as an NHL team. That I think it's just a
oh
matter of
yeah,
time before we see Rosen in a bottom six type of role where he's kind of banging away at those opportunities until he gets a shot. But yeah, he's been a very, very good prospect in the AHL so far, and I believe he leads. Yeah, he leads Rochester in points, which is
impressive.
not too bad for a player. I think he's still 20, or maybe
He's young
21.
still.
Yeah, he's very,
Yeah,
very young and was drafted young as well. He was a late birthday. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot to love here. But that brings us to our last player, Brad Lambert, one of your favorites.
one of my
Take it away
favorites.
on him. Yeah, and what do
Yeah.
you think about Lambert's progression so far? I think he's a point per game so far in the AHL, right?
He is indeed 12 points in 12 games.
Mhm.
And Brad Lambert is a player that could not catch a break in his draft year.
Yeah.
Apart from injuries, like he stayed healthy, but apart from that, he really couldn't catch a break.
Mhm.
Nothing was going in. His line mates could not support him. They could not match his mental pace at all in
Yeah.
Liga, and that really led to him falling like tremendously down to 30th overall. And Last year in the WHL on the stacked Seattle team was excellent, but the bigger question in my mind was how we would adapt to the AHL, because he had some decent games early on last season in the AHL before getting sent down to junior, but there are also some duds in there. He had a good training camp, but in the regular season, I saw a lot more issues in his play. But this season, he's been far, far better. That stint in the WHL has done wonders for his confidence. He is really, really determined with the puck on his stick now. He is far more trusting of his own skill and its ability to solve problems against high-level professional competition. And overall, he's been the most dynamic player on that Manitoba Moose roster so far this season, which surprises me not at all, but it's great to see. And look, this is a 19-year-old player, right? And he's already doing quite nicely in the AHL. So Brad Lambert having success always brings a smile to my face, but he's been very, very good to start off.
For sure. And that wraps things up for our second segment. Now we'll talk about some defensemen here to close things off in our final segment. We'll talk about Brandt Clarke, Logan Mayu, Olen Zellweger, and a lot more coming up on today's show after these messages from our sponsors over at eBay Motors.
Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. From superchargers to roof racks to LED headlights and far more, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your ride, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, which is only available to U.S. customers. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP. Keep your ride or die at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
All right, so let's wrap things up for today's show. We'll talk about some productive defensemen among prospects in the AHL. We'll start off with the big name, and I think the most impressive of this bunch. It's Brandt Clarke. He's got 11 points in 13 games, but beyond that, the progression in this game, especially defensively, has been fantastic. I mean, he's still about a bang average skater, but he's mentally ahead of the game, and that helps him a lot in terms of his ability to close gaps off the rush, to clear the net front, to identify threats that are sweeping through the slot. A very aware, very conscious defensive player. And I think that's the biggest progression in his game, and the main thing that was holding him off from becoming a kind of NHL staple was that he wanted to see the defensive game come up a couple notches. I believe he played a couple NHL games in his draft year, and it was very clear that, he was a mainly offensive leaning defenseman. But yeah, he had the tools in order to become a two-way force. I mean, mentally, offensively, always been ahead of the game. It's just applying those same principles defensively that was still the holding point, and I feel like he has this year with the Ontario Reign. But yeah, what's your thoughts been on Brandt Clarke since his draft year, and what do you feel has come along the most, since he's gone drafted?
I watched him a ton in the OHL last season, and he was the best player in the league when he was playing. He played only half the season, but he was like 2 points a game as a defenseman, and he has, I think, over a goal a game in the playoffs as a defenseman, and just like absurd things. And he's been really, really good at the AHL level this season, and I was really hoping that he'd crack the NHL roster to start the year, but clearly LA wanted to give him a bit more time, which is a patient approach that I don't mind. But he is definitely knocking on that door to get a call up already. And this is a player, as you said, with the mental pace, but also the skill and the toolkit to really make it work at the NHL level. And the defensive game has improved. I still view him primarily as an offensive piece rather than a two-way projection at this stage, but maybe that changes in a couple years' time. But the raw skill here is really exceptional, and to do what he's been able to do at basically every level apart from his couple NHL games, despite having subpar skating, is really impressive and indicative of just how high end that intelligence is. And he's been just excellent this season. Like I've seen a couple sequences where he's under double variable pressure, like double pressure from two different opponents on the forecheck, and he's behind the net, and he just makes like a great bang pass into the neutral zone onto the tape and springs like a 3-on-2 going the other way, and
Yep.
just consistently creating advantages while being pressured at high paces and just mentally ahead of the game at the AHL level as an AHL rookie is really, really impressive. So Clarke's been a standout in the AHL so far this season, definitely in contention for best rookie so far in that league. With guys like Joshua Roy. But he's been really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. But moving on to Logan Mayu, who is an AHL rookie. It's his first year in the pros, and you can see it a bit more with Mayu. There have been some really intense defensive struggles. He's -10 right now, but like plus minus is plus minus. It's a bit misleading, but
And it's
overall,
Laval.
yeah. But that's the thing is, Mayu's playing pretty much top minutes in Laval, and he's the type of player who you really need to shelter like defensively, because you need to give him a good, defense pairing that, complements his offensive skill set, because Mayu's shot is ridiculous. His offensive instincts are really good when he's jumping into rushes in the offensive zone, when he's activating off that blue line, he can do a lot of damage. But defensively, it's been rough. And we look at the save percentage in Laval, we look at the shot totals in Laval, we look at the goal differentials in Laval, but you know it is a collective issue. But Mayu is part of that deep here, that decor, and it's clear that there are some plays that just, he'll cause a turnover in the defensive zone. He'll fire a puck up a lane that's not the right lane, which causes the opponents to get the puck back, and occasionally just gets caught puck watching, and that's caused a lot of slot shots when he's on the ice. But overall, I mean, the production's there: 9 points in 15 games, including 4 goals. He doesn't have a power play goal yet, which is terrifying because he's a power play producer. Which, I mean, as soon as that gets clicking, how many goals is he going to score this year? But that's the main thing with Mayu, is that there was never any doubt about his ability to score goals. He's got one of the hardest
Yeah.
shots outside of the NHL. And it's an accurate shot, both off the wrister, both off the slapper. I mean, there are so many different, there are so many different ways that he can punish goaltenders. But overall, the defensive game, I just haven't seen much progression there. Have you?
Not very much. I haven't watched too much of the Rocket this season yet, so
Mhm.
I'm gonna wait a little bit before chiming in on that front.
For
But
sure.
as you said, like, the individual offensive tools with Mayu were never in doubt, right? Like the
Mhm.
handling skill and the offensive anticipation and the shot are just all really, really high end tools. The question has always been, can he build a cohesive game around that does not just like impact his team negatively on most even strength shifts? And
Yeah.
in the couple of viewings I've had of the Rocket this season, I haven't been focusing entirely on Mayu, but as you said, there's definitely still many defensive warts in that game. But the shot has definitely been a weapon, and Laval's always looking to exploit it and use it to put the puck in the net. And I'm curious to kind of see how Laval's system kind of evolves around Mayu, if they're able to find a defenseman that can actually support him well enough at even strength that he's not a net negative. I think that would be the next steps for him at the AHL level, but the offense has translated very, very well so far.
Absolutely. That brings us to another prospect who has those offensive leanings and has been producing decently so far in the AHL. It's Olen Zellweger. He's got 8 points, 2 goals, and 6 assists in 12 games. And yeah, I mean, the defensive progression isn't as much as I thought it would be. I saw a lot of really good defensive plays from Zellweger in his draft year, in his draft plus two rather. And I expected Zellweger to take that jump this year and kind of prove that, okay, I've learned the right things in the dub. I've learned to round out my game well enough. I still see that he's kind of a step behind plays defensively, and even occasionally trying to cheat offensively. He's
Yeah.
trying to push the offensive zone. He's trying to accelerate breakouts. He's trying to, when his defense pairing, when his defense partner gets the puck, he's not looking to create a good passing lane, but rather he's trying to jumpstart a breakout by kind of pushing up the defensive zone for a breakout pass so he can carry it out. For example, there are small details like these where I still see a very offensive leaning Zellweger, which, great. He's got a fantastic offensive skill set. Um, but at the same time, you want to hit that balance. I don't think Zellweger's hit that balance yet.
Yeah.
He's a really good player, though. I mean,
He's
the
excellent.
like Anaheim Ducks fans should be really, really excited about Zellweger. He's one of the more creative and inventive offensive defensemen I've ever seen. And on top of that, I mean, despite the fact that it's still a work in progress, there's work in progress already. I mean,
Oh, for
he's
sure.
improved his defensive game for sure, right?
He has. No, I've seen like progression on that front, but not quite at the same pace as we've seen with Pavel Mintyukov this season. I
Yeah,
think that might force Zellweger a little bit into his shadow at the moment. But these are like the Ducks are pretty much set in terms of their future top four core on defense, and Zellweger is going to be a very important piece of that. He will need to be a little bit more insulated than a guy like Mintyukov does, because Mintyukov is just more of a two-way force than Zellweger ever has been.
yeah.
But no, this is still a highly talented player. I mean, having 8 points in 12 AHL games as a professional rookie is already pretty damn good. So I'm not overly concerned with Zellweger, but he will need a little bit more time to adapt to the professional level, and I think that was pretty clear. Also, like, as of last season, because he is kind of that undersized offensive defenseman mold that kind of
Yeah.
always needs to add more tools in order to adapt to the professional game than guys like Mintyukov do.
Yeah.
But Zellweger has been one of the better AHL defensemen this season so far, too, in my viewing. So he's been very good.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports, and there are 24-hour channels. You can check them out anytime. And make sure to log in for our tomorrow's show, where we talk about some NCAA standout, including a couple of NTDP boys who have been popping off lately and producing a bit more. But this has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.